Dex is a Cyberpunk Metroidvania role-playing game. Boy, is that a mouthful. To put it in simpler terms, it's the world of something like Deus Ex mixed with the gameplay of something like Symphony of the Night, though the levels in this game aren't as complicated as that castle. In this sci-fi thriller, you take on the role of Dex, a young woman who is beset by the police after being swatted in retaliation for an argument on the female fashion advice subreddit. This incident serves as the start of a conspiratorial rabbit hole that you must go down in an effort to clear your name and unearth a dastardly plot to take over society. It's also an RPG, so you can put off that quest for as long as possible so you can help some hot dog vendor steal a shipment of mustard from the Kroger down the street. With all this in mind, get ready to dye your hair blue and augment your body because we're taking on the role of... Alright, so this was a pretty cool little game. To give a non-memey description of what this thing is, Dex is a cyberpunk platformer and RPG hybrid that I think is primarily going to appeal to fans of the Castlevania and Metroid games. It came out in the mid-2010s as part of that boom of independently made platformers that were all the rage. While a lot of these games are really highly regarded, some of the more cynical people watching this are probably familiar with some corners of the internet taking to referring to games in this trend as indie shit. While I can kind of understand that, any trend can get tiring eventually, I will say that Dex does some things pretty differently from the rest of the pack that set it apart. It was developed by an indie team working out of the Czech Republic, or Czechia, or whatever the fuck it's called now. It had two main selling points in 2015 that made it stand out from the other 3 million platformers that were coming out on Steam at the time, and that's that firstly, it has RPG elements that include stuff like character build customization and a dialogue system, and secondly, it has a cyberpunk setting. The second point, the fact that it's a cyberpunk game, isn't really all that unique nowadays, but at the time it hadn't yet been run into the ground as a backdrop for video games. We had Deus Ex and Watch Dogs had just come out, but both of those games are more of twists on the genre than stuff like Cyberpunk 2077 and Turbo Overkill that are a lot more emblematic of the style as a whole. Dex is more similar to the latter two games in that it sticks a lot more closely to the established framework of the genre and doesn't really venture far outside of what you would normally expect from works in this style, but at the time it came out, that was fine because, like I said, if you really wanted a cyberpunk game, you didn't have a huge amount of options. Plus, I'm a sucker for this kind of thing anyway, so I don't really give a fuck. I'm writing this script under the assumption that 99% of the people who watch this are acutely aware of what cyberpunk is, but if you're not, it's a subgenre of science fiction that basically says that technology won't save us and will instead probably make shit a lot worse. If you want a crash course on what the genre is about, then watch a movie called Blade Runner and read a book called Neuromancer, and that'll basically tell you everything right off the bat. If you want to see some of the historical predecessors, then you can read a bunch of Philip K. Dick books after that and lose your fucking mind. Another genre that's on display here is film noir, more specifically neo-noir, as pretentious film buffs are apt to call it and all that. To give the clip notes for that, film noir was a thing in the 20s, 19s, to 50s, and then in the 60s a bunch of French guys went and did all this crazy shit with camera work and editing and fucked up all the conventions of filmmaking, which changed how every genre was made, but film noir especially, alongside the rapid cultural changes of the decade, which led to it basically morphing into a new genre which is now called neo-noir. There's all your ivory tower academic genre descriptions to explain shit you're probably not interested in. Now let's talk about the game itself. I first heard about this game about the first time I downloaded Steam on my laptop back in like 2014. It looked interesting, so I put it on my wish list, which is where it sat until 2021 when I finally got it on sale, after which it sat in my library until last week when I finally played it. If you haven't been able to tell yet, I've bought a lot of games for dirt cheap over the years and never played them. I kind of started to hate games for a little bit, but that was mostly because my friends were constantly playing Tarkov and Warzone, so I was on those a lot, and leaving those games behind is probably one of the most healthy things I've ever done, and now I'm playing games that aren't shit and actually having a good time now. Now, as I said earlier, Dex combines the gameplay of a two-dimensional platformer and the narrative and character progression of a role-playing game. You've got a big interconnected map, the city of Harbor Prime, where you go from district to district for the sake of both exploration and quest completion. The inciting incident that sets off the narrative and the gameplay is that homegirl here is chilling in here one room and then the cops come knocking, so the hacker known as 4chan sees his chance to impress Milady and helps her skedaddle the fuck out of there.
Wake up. Wake up. They are coming for you. You need to get out of here. You can slow them down by Buy yourself some time. Here. Now focus. This is augmented reality. Your way to interact with the world around you.
Our heroine is the titular Dex, a woman who is light on backstory, but heavy on visual flair with a Rick Deckard cosplay and light blue hair. I feel like in this day and age, a character like this would get like 1,000 videos made about how she's proof that the industry is trash now or something. Luckily, it was 2015, so the culture war hadn't kicked off yet, and you get away with making whatever kind of character you wanted without having to worry about agitating the chronically online. On the subject of the chronically online, the first person that Dex meets after escaping her newly vacant apartment is a guy named Decker, an ex-hacker who runs a bar who helps shelter her from the authorities. They get to his friend Tony's place, which becomes your base of operations, and you're set loose upon the world. The world is neither staggeringly large, now that's okay though, let me finish, nor is it insanely dense, but it's tightly designed, fun to navigate, and filled with some fairly interesting characters and side quests. Aside from navigation, most of the quests are going to involve either combat, hacking, or dialogue. The combat can be further broken down into two subcategories, melee and guns. Both are straightforward. There's a rudimentary hand-to-hand system where you either punch or block. Not much to it, but there is a definite level of skill required in being able to efficiently time your blocks and dodges. There's probably more to it, but I didn't level it up at all because I was more focused on firearms. I am from the South, so this makes sense. Just kidding, I actually don't even own guns. I just like shooting digital representations of my adversaries. When it comes to guns, you have 5 options: a handgun, magnum, shotgun, SMG, and a stun gun. The pistol is probably the first weapon you'll get your hands on since it's so cheap, but it does fuck all for damage, so it's probably in your best interest to cop a hand cannon as quickly as possible. The hand cannon is a pretty significant upgrade since you can kill people in one magazine, and it's also pretty accurate. The shotgun is more of a mixed bag, does a ton of damage but has especially short range and can only get off 2 shots before you have to reload. You can buy one from a dealer, but you can also find one hidden away, so I would recommend just doing that since it's sort of hit or miss. The MP7 though, this thing kind of fucks. It has a bit of kick to it, but it does a ton of damage and does it really fast. Since it's the best weapon in the game, it costs a fuckload of money, but once you get it, you can do like drive-bys on people and it's great. The other thing that has a pretty big effect on your playstyle is augmentations, which is pretty much a requirement for anything Cyberpunk related. There's a bunch of different upgrades to choose from, but I mostly went with ones that let me explore more of the map, so a rebreather to get through toxic gas and pneumatic legs that let me jump to higher locations. These 2 abilities are pretty much required to beat some of the side quests. Actually, now that I think about this, the rebreather is literally required to beat at least one, so that can kind of limit your options here. The third big aspect of the gameplay is the hacking. Like any good cyberpunk work, there's a pretty big emphasis on the act of digital breaking and entering, with the cyberpunks themselves teaching you early on how to do this. Once you jack into a computer system, the game turns into a minimalist twin-stick shooter where you have to navigate a virtual maze and fight hostile defense programs in order to empty bank accounts and read people who write erotic Mars Candy Company fanfiction. There's a catch though, because sim death may not mean real death, but it does mean 50 points of brain damage, which can stack pretty quickly if you're bad at this. Which I was. Luckily, there's a solution to any and all health problems you may find yourself developing over the course of the game. Yeah, whenever you're feeling bad, just go and blow $80 on energy drinks. Wait, how fucking bad is inflation in this world where a can of Monster is $20 friggin'? Now that it's been firmly established how bleak this game's dystopia is, let's talk about the fourth and final aspect of the gameplay, the dialogue, which will also segue into a discussion on the game's narrative. Like most story-based RPGs, there's a dialogue system where the player can engage with side characters in a match of verbal sparring that may or may not be a prelude to physical sparring. This is probably the most undercooked aspect of the game in my opinion. There's not a huge amount of opportunity here for role-playing, and most of the dialogue options you get are just questions that you can ask at any point in the conversation, so there's no real stakes there. On top of this, there's barely any speech checks in the game. You have a charisma stat, but there's only a handful of moments in the game where you can ever actually use it, and all it does is give you the ability to finish some of the quests faster. On a better note, I think the characters are decently well written. It's a bit of a rogues gallery of all your different cyberpunk archetypes, but they're competently written and voice acted. There's no flavor NPCs, everyone that you talk talk to is either a vendor or involved in the main or side quests, but I don't mind that since this game is going for a more contained experience than something like Fallout or Cyberpunk. I think the best side quests were one where you investigate a restaurant that got closed down and another where you have to find a woman's missing brother. Like I said, this game has a pretty heavy noir atmosphere, so I kinda like pretending to be the world's least conspicuous private eye. The main quest itself is actually pretty short, only made up of about 4 or 5 subquests. These subquests are probably the longest missions in the game, with the last 3 taking you to separate locations from the main map and being around 2 to 3 hours to clear. The story that's contained within these missions is pretty standard affair for this genre, dealing with the usual themes of artificial intelligence, transhumanism, cloning, mass surveillance, corporate overreach. If you've consumed literally any media from this genre, you've seen all this shit before, and I'm not gonna lie to you and tell you that Dex does anything especially unique with it. That's not to say that the main quest is bad. I didn't think it was, just that it's very standard, which could be a good or a bad thing. Really, my only criticism of it is that I feel like the narrative thinks it's a little smarter than it actually is, but I don't think it ever reaches the levels of unabashed pretension that you can find in something like Soma or Firewatch. Also, I just realized this is the 3rd video I've made where I find a way to shit on Soma. I need to put a moratorium on that before it gets annoying. Overall, I'd say this was a pretty good game, and it made me a little nostalgic for the mid-2010s, when it seemed like the industry was about to be taken over by independent developers and the big budget space hadn't yet been taken over by live service stuff. Out of curiosity, I looked up what the devs were doing these days and came across some pretty sad news. Apparently the lead dev of Dex, a guy named Jan Jurkovsky, passed away just after the game came out from kidney failure. It was apparently pretty sudden, and he was only 26, so I can imagine it was fairly devastating for everyone on the team and the people who knew him. With regards to the rest of the studio, unfortunately they haven't really done a whole lot that's publicly available since this game. They did a couple of platformers for mobile and announced a Kickstarter for a game called Ghost Theory that never went anywhere. Since that, they seem to have mostly fallen off the radar than a Switch port for Dex. Their social media has also been really sporadic, with their last post being early last year and just an announcement for the Switch port. Whatever they're doing now, I hope it works out for them, and maybe one day they'll get the chance to continue the world of Dex, though I understand if it might be kind of a painful memory for them. I think the game has an interesting enough world and mix of gameplay conventions that it could warrant revisiting one day, and it got a positive enough reception and seems to have sold well enough. The fact that they're gone so quiet though and Ghost Theory basically fell off doesn't exactly give me a huge amount of confidence in the future for these games, but you never know. Either way, it's sad that the dude died, but at least he got to see his vision come to fruition and be released for everyone to see before he went. So this video has kind of ended on a bit of a downer, so I'll just say that Dex is a pretty good game, and if you want to play a Cyberpunk Metroidvania, here you go, it's right here and it's a fun game. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've gotta go surgically augment my legs so I can more efficiently run from the cops after robbing a pawn shop. Hey everybody, if you made it this far into the video, I just want to say thanks, it means a whole lot. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all your standard YouTube outro stuff. And big thanks to the patrons over on Patreon, Spec Teams 1 Slingshots and Joe Sneaks, as well as the members here on YouTube, Saiga and Grungles. Yeah, thanks a lot, y'all. And other than that, I'll see y'all in the next video. Goodbye.